So I guess we'll get started. I'll just do a little bit of an introduction before we start the session here. So welcome to the Dialogues Workshop series on anti-racist pedagogy in ethnomusicology, which is being held in conjunction with the annual meeting of the Canadian Society for Traditional Music. So this series is one initiative of a broader project titled Dialogues, Decolonizing Sound, Music, and Dance Studies, funded by the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada. The project is facilitated through a partnership between the International Council for Traditional Music, ICTM, and CSTM, with the support of the Center for Sound Communities at Cape Breton University, and the collaboration of numerous international scholars and students. This year's CSTM virtual conference is hosted by the University of Alberta, co-chaired by Dr. Julia Bile and Dr. Daniel Akira Stadnicki. My name is Toshio Oki, and I will be introducing the workshops and controlling various technical aspects of this series. And in this four-part roundtable workshop series, presenters will discuss various aspects and strategies that foster decolonization and anti-racism in classroom and non-classroom settings. We are excited to welcome presenters from around the world, offering their valuable perspectives on decolonization and anti-racist praxis from a global context. This roundtable will consist of presentations of about 10 minutes. Presenter nodes will introduce themselves before proceeding with their presentations, and other presenter nodes will then be given 5 minutes to respond to the presentation. Once all the presentations and responses have been completed, we'll invite you to join in on the discussion. So I'll now proceed with today's session titled Engaging Local Knowledge Holders in Teaching the Music of Here. And we'd like to invite Dr. Marcia Ostashewski to introduce and facilitate the session.
Hello, Jessie. Welcome. This is my dear friend and colleague, Clifford of Membertou First Nation, and literally on the road is Graham Marshall, who is also a council member in Membertou First Nation. Clifford is a revered and beloved storyteller and traditional knowledge holder. We come to you today from the ancestral and unceded territories of the Mi'kmaq people. Cape Breton Island, where we are today, is known as Unama'ki. It's part of the larger Mi'kmaq traditional territories of the Mi'kmaq people. We have a short video for you today, and I'll just ask Toshio. Thank you very much, Toshio, for managing this. Welcome also to our esteemed guests and knowledge holders from around the world, Tiriki, Onus, and Sally Treloyn, who are in Australia, Jorge Carvalho, who's in Brasilia in Brazil, and Jessie Vallejo, who's in the United States. Should we say anything further before we begin our series of videos?
No, it's a great to be presenting from our corner of the world and sharing our information with people around the globe. It's an honor to be here today. Come from this territory, born from this land, and it is fitting that a proper acknowledgement. Thank you for that land acknowledgement, because it's very important to know that this is unceded territory. And usually when I do presentations to university students, I say, yes, this is the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. And because I'm fighting racism ever since I was a little boy, I asked the students, okay, what does unceded mean? Tell me, raise your hand if you know what it means. And quite a few of them refused to raise their hands. So anyways, we will go forward and start with this video. You're going to see me blinking my eyes a lot in that video. The room was very, very warm and my eyeballs were drying up. So I'm not disinterested or anything. It was just the heat from the fire. But we're ready to proceed, yeah.
Thank you.
Kwe, Jalasia Unama'ki, and thank you all for joining us today. Indelusi Graham Marshall. My name is Graham Marshall from the Membertou First Nation here in Mi'kmaq. And today I have both of my great colleagues here side by side.
Yeah, Clifford Paul here. I'm a traditional knowledge holder from the First Nation community of Membertou, and back home I have I'm a proud father of 5 adult children, 11 grandchildren, and I keep busy, and can't wait to engage in today's conversation.
Thank you both. Nindeluisi Marcia Ostashewski. My name is Marcia Ostashewski, and I'm a faculty member at Cape Breton University and the director of the Center for Sound Communities. It's a place where Clifford and Graham and I and many other community members in diverse communities in this region gather and work together in research. Today's workshop is part of the Dialogues project towards decolonizing sound, music, and dance studies. It's the second in a 4-part series focusing on anti-racist pedagogies. It's a workshop titled Engaging Traditional Knowledge Holders in Teaching the Music of Here. To provide a bit of a background, this is one of a series of initiatives that was inspired by collective action of many scholars working across the country. Together we articulated the Canadian Society for Traditional Music call to action, and one of the actions in the list was to develop some anti-racist pedagogies, because many music educators across the country want to integrate principles of indigenization and decolonization into their teaching practice, into the classroom, recognizing the traditional knowledge as part of music studies, but none of us knows the right way to go about it on our own. And so those of us on this panel today who do have some experience in working toward these strategies have come together, and we're sharing our stories, at least the experiences that we have. And because I work very closely with Clifford and Graham and many other people in Membertou, we thought we might spend some time with you today and share a few observations. I was teaching a course at Cape Breton University on North American Indigenous musics through a pedagogy of care and mutuality. I was very transparent about the fact that I don't have Indigenous ancestry, and my role here was to facilitate learning within an academic context. And so I searched for ways to engage knowledge holders, to bring knowledge holders in the classroom. At the same time, we had many Indigenous students in the classroom and who were experts in their own right, many with their own experiences and knowledge. And one of them was Graham, who would often very generously share his own stories and experiences with students in the class who were Indigenous and non-Indigenous. I asked Graham, the next time the course came around, to share his stories, if he would, with the classroom about his experience in the course. For example, when he was in the course, we changed some assignments to allow for oral assessment, which honored Indigenous oral history and culture. And so I'm wondering, Graham, if you might like to speak about stories about your experience both as a student, speaking about the oral history, but also any other experiences you might want to talk about when you're giving talks to our class, but then other universities, and Clifford as well.
Yeah, thank you, Marcia, and absolutely. The thing about having, as an Indigenous person enrolled into a university, as a mature student as well, the one thing that really inspired me was the help and the assistance of the faculty of CBU. And when we have non-Indigenous professors that are willing to learn, and where we are learning together in these classrooms, is very vital and very important. Non-Indigenous professors that are inspiring and then learning into Indigenous programs such as Marcia's was such a very grateful and honored and profound way of how we approach the class. It was very important that we were learning from each other, and then at the same time we are experience reconciliation at the same time of every class that we are doing. When we have that communication with professors and students, exercising that every day is very vital and very important on how we can beat the plague of racism throughout the societies of the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know earlier you spoke about the response that other students in the classroom, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, had to your presence and your sharing. I'm wondering if you might have some thoughts about that.
Absolutely. You know, as an Indigenous student as well, we take learning at a different approach. We're kind of a visual that we need to see it. You know, as elders, when we were growing up, me and Clifford, and shown, they would say, I will show you first. And whatever the exercise or the task that we had to, you know, learn and develop, that's what our elders would tell us, and our parents and grandparents. I will show you once, because, you know, different projects will be like, here's the instruction booklet, this is how you build it. But as an Indigenous, we adapt better of showing us and talking us through where that is a lesson that we are learning at the same time of the virtues that are instilled in those types of teachings, such as oral traditions and stories.
Thank you.
Graham was just talking about was the transmission of the knowledge. We learn with our hands and our eyes and our hearts. So we go out there beyond the walls of a classroom, you know, and out there, when we're out there, we go into the world is our classroom, and we're guided by spirit, we're guided by our elders, we're guided by our ancestors, we're guided by those who haven't been born yet. We sit in a very sacred learning environment. You know, in the classroom, it's sort of like we're imitating a British schoolmaster system, an old system, where the instructor gives the information and the students absorb it like sponges. But in a traditional learning environment, the arrow, you know, and those arrows of instruction are just one way. And in our world, and other worlds that rely on ancient traditional knowledge, the arrows of instruction go from me to the people I'm speaking to, or telling stories to, or singing songs to, and they're learning from me, I'm learning from them, and they're learning from each other. So the arrows of instruction are multi-directional. So for us, that is the learning environment of taking our traditional knowledge and making it strong. We don't have to formalize it. What we do is we work it, and when you take it into a classroom, you're back within the walls. So what do? We bring our drums, we bring our songs, and we tell our stories. So we invigorate those environments with the life of what we have in natural, traditional learning environments. I see, and it's growing up, we had teachings from our mothers who valued education and taught us the virtues, you know, manners, to be nice, all these great things that our moms can provide us. And our dads taught us to work on construction sites and to be strong, to be hard, and to your name's attached to your work. And in life, we found out that we had to carry two sets of toolboxes. We had our traditional knowledge, our traditional stories, our music, our language, our songs, our hunting, our fishing. That's a traditional toolbox. But our moms made sure that we got educated, and they made sure that we were there to honor those teachings and to honor the modern Western scientific approach. So as a practitioner, because I grew up with two sets of toolboxes, I have stories that are traditional. And I, as a traditional person, I can travel the world and tell those stories. And I can get away with that, and that's okay. But I also have my modern Western scientific education, you know, the other I in the two-eyed seeing. I have my university degree, my high school diploma, my time spent in labs, my time spent in universities, and I can tell a story that way as well. And as a person who has that toolbox, that well-worn toolbox, I can get away with doing both. But as a two-eyed seeing practitioner, I have to use both ways of knowing, both ways of seeing, and I present that.
And Alan, thank you.
Thank you.
Lala.
Hello. What an honor it is to be here with you. My name's Tiriki Onus. I'm a Yorta Yorta and Jar Jar Warang, artist, academic, filmmaker, performer, and maker. I have the great honor to be coming to you now from Kulin Nations country, from a point of flux right on the edge of Bunwurrung and Wurundjeri countries. Countries where song has been sung, dance has been danced, art has been made, and stories have been poured into the very fabric of this landscape for thousands of generations. I know that I and my dear colleague Sally are both incredibly grateful for the diplomacy and love that has been shown to us as we endeavour to tell our stories here on this country. I acknowledge that diplomacy, the generosity of spirit from those who own and speak for this country. And I want to acknowledge the countries that each of you sit on as well. Sovereign peoples who have maintained their practice and their history around the globe for thousands of generations, just as has been done here. I have the great honour of being the head of the Willan Centre for Indigenous Arts and Cultural Development at the University of Melbourne. The Willan Centre itself sits on the lands of the Yalukit Willam clan of the Bunwurrung. And in 2022, we will be marking the 20th anniversary since a group of students, largely non-Indigenous, camped out on the back lawns of our faculty and lit a fire. A fire from which our centre takes its name, Willan, meaning fire or flame in the languages of the Bunwurrung and the Wurundjeri. That student protested the lack of representation of First Peoples within our community of the Victorian College of the Arts has led to an efflorescence, a desire from our colleagues and our friends, regardless of cultural background, to be able to engage with the knowledges that belong here in this country, with the stories of place, to see themselves as agents of change who have the opportunity to celebrate the stories of this place that never stopped and over the last 60,000 years have only been contributed to further. Over to you, Sal.
Thank you so much, Tiriki. It's my great pleasure as well, and an honour to be sitting here also on the land of Kulin Nations, on Wurundjeri country. I am an ethnomusicologist who has been working for the last 2 decades in another country, in the far northwest of the continent of Australia, in a region known as the Kimberley, and particularly on the lands of the nations of the Ngurinyan, the Wurundjeri and the Wunambal. I, as an ethnomusicologist, have engaged for many years in participatory research, working with elder song people to record and document their knowledges of song, to understand the role that their song and musical practices have played in recording histories and managing histories, musical practices as a tool, as a set of tools to manage massive environmental change. And most recently, our work has been largely around collaborative approaches to sustaining these practices into the future, and understanding what it takes for the academy and for society to act responsibly in relation to them and wisely. So I have this kind of knowledge or responsibility to knowledges from these countries and peoples quite a distance from Kulin Nations, where I am, where the university is, where the Willen Centre is. And as an ethnomusicologist, in a faculty of fine arts and music, working across a conservatorium of music and college of arts, the challenge has really always been how to navigate the complex space of border crossing, like what knowledge is appropriate to share, what level of knowledge is appropriate to share. How do I honour my commitments and responsibilities to elders with whom I worked 20 years ago, alongside an honouring of the self-determination of societies and people today, generations on? How do I bring knowledge across safely? And how do I balance the self-determination of Indigenous peoples with whom I've worked with regard to governance of their knowledge and governance of their data in a research environment of open access, in an academy where our assumption is that knowledge that you have will be shared, will be taught. So it's a complex space, and there's no one single path to tread. That history has brought me to the Willen Centre, to the great benefit, personal and professional, of working alongside Tiriki Onus here to navigate that path, and to play a role in the teaching and the teaching of students, the teaching of the community about the importance of Indigenous music, and it's an entirely appropriate place for me to be, and it's, I see it as a great benefit at this juncture. And that's what we're going to be chatting about today, our collaboration in the creation of some new music subjects through the Willen Centre, and what has been involved in that.
I'm pleased that you say that, Sally, because I think it's entirely appropriate that you're here as well. I love that we share this space together. If there is one thing that I am passionate about, it is intercultural collaboration. It's about being able to mobilise the privileges which have been handed to us from this broader world, and to be able to use them to reinforce the reclamation and the celebration of the knowledges of this country, or these countries within this continent of Australia. That the specificity of understanding whose country we stand on, the knowledges of place, are at the heart of what we do. When we have an appreciation of those knowledges of place, we are able to situate ourselves, to create frameworks for culturally safe interactions. We create an opportunity to connect across borders, across language barriers, to revive cultural exchange and sharing of old, albeit in a new and technologically advanced fashion, shall we say. We still have an opportunity to connect with the deep rhythms and the deep stories of this country, where creative practice does not exist in a silo, where everything comes together in a holistic, perfect storm of practice, where the singer dances, the dancer paints, the painter tells stories, where collectively we work together. And to do this in our academic programs, we don't feel it's enough to just engage people as guest artists. We engage our collaborators and communities of practice as active participants in the design of our academic programs. Because the learning doesn't take place just on the basis of the content alone. It's not about what we teach necessarily so much as how we teach it.
So for me, from the perspective of an ethnomusicologist in this space, it's not just my responsibility to deliver knowledges that I have of particular musical traditions and practices, but actually to deliver those in a way that is acting responsibly in relation to not just the sources of that knowledge, not just in relation to guest artists co-creating and co-presenting that knowledge, but also in relation to other guest artists in our courses, guest artists from here, and importantly, in relation to our student body, our very diverse student body made up of diverse Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous, international and local. Those groups, alongside our Willen staff, our Willen family, the broader communities that we are responsible to and act in relation to, and our broader university community, all need to be taken into account when we determine the content that we deliver and the way in which we deliver it.
And this is one of the most important aspects, we believe, of embracing the knowledges of place and of here. These are the musics of here. These are the stories of here. We, all of us, come as guests and active participants. But by having a framework for engaging across borders, we're able to be aware of our place, our country, our roles here. We don't privilege one knowledge over another. Rather, we're able to make space for the diversity and the complexity of all of our stories and all of our countries to come together in this space. We take responsibility in our relationship to others, whether it's in that room, online, or in a global space, or across time. These are the stories and the musics of here, and the here always matters.
Okay, before we start the next video, I would like to invite Jorge. Are you there, Jorge?
Yes.
Yes, Jorge, could you...
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Yes. Hello. Good evening to everybody.
Could you I would like to, before we play the video, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great, and then we can proceed to your video.
Yes. I'm José Jorge de Carvalho. I'm a professor of anthropology of the University of Brasilia and head of the Institute of Inclusion in Higher Education and Research, where I developed the project Meeting of Knowledges, aimed at inviting indigenous master musicians to teach in public universities on a par with us, academic lecturers.
Thank you, Jorge. I'll start the video now.
Meeting of Knowledges is an anti-racist pedagogy. One strong characteristics of School of Music and music departments in Latin America, and as far as I know, also in Africa and possibly Asia and Oceania, is their extremely Eurocentric curriculum. So instead of calling them simply as schools of music, it will be more appropriate to call them schools of Western erudite music, because they are restricted to the Western repertoire and don't teach indigenous music and not even traditional popular music in Brazil. To face this extreme Eurocentrism in music, so extreme to the extent that I now call it musical racism, in 2010, I developed in the University of Brasilia the project called Meeting of Knowledges, which aims at including the non-Western music traditions of our countries, indigenous, Afro-Brazilian, popular traditional, etc., to the schools of music, with the necessary condition that they will be taught by the masters of those traditions, with the same academic authority that we exercise when we teach Western music. Based on this initial diagnosis of our particularly colonized and racist academic musical environment, I will draw arguments and examples of anti-racist pedagogies with particular emphasis on its effects in musicology, ethnomusicology, and music schools on the basis of the meeting of knowledges. This project unifies two different and complementary fronts of the anti-racist struggle in Brazilian universities: the confrontation of ethnic and racial discrimination and the confrontation of epistemic racism. In Brazil, indigenous peoples and Afro-Brazilian peoples were historically victims of these two types of racism. Of these two fronts, the issue of quotas came first, as they were a means to demand answer for two concrete problems. Firstly, indigenous students complained the absence of indigenous music and demanded its inclusion in the curriculum. Secondly, it had to account for the absence of indigenous lecturers who were badly needed to teach the first generation of indigenous students who entered public universities through quotas. I call this epistemic Eurocentrism that leads to a systematic absence of indigenous music in music schools and conservatoires as part of a generalized musical racism. The attitude of silencing, denying, degrading, diminishing, or excluding indigenous music and indigenous epistemology and their corresponding cultural traditions from academic curriculum and practices. Thus, we can sum up the transformation required for the building a school of music that really does justice to the musical diversity of our countries in 4 levels of racism that operated simultaneously and in an articulate form during the entire 20th century. A, absence of indigenous students in the classroom. B, absence of indigenous lecturers in the classroom. C, unification of musical pedagogy in all musical schools. If the classroom was supposed to have only white students who had Western erudite music as their reference for what higher forms of music sound like, they should all be taught in the same way. We can take here of a pedagogical racism. Teaching music according to Western parameters became a way of denying the singularity or uniqueness of indigenous music. And D, the unification of the formative model in our schools of music. Not only all the students must be taught in the same way, but they also must acquire the same formative grids. Summing up, we are inheritors, until very recently, of a racist and colonized musical education and musical hierarchy, predominant in Latin American societies that appears almost a caricature. White students learn Western erudite music in a homogeneous and unified pedagogy. They all study the same repertoire, the same musicological, and ethnomusicological training and approaches, and they are taught exclusively by white teachers. If we judge Latin American countries by what happens inside their music schools, from Argentina to Mexico, we will have to conclude that our countries are inhabited only by white people. And the only musical traditions that they practice are Western erudite genres of classical music. The only country that seems to be an exception to this model is Cuba, that teaches genres of Afro-Cuban religious musical traditions that do not enter music academic spaces. And in spite of this openness to incorporate part of her own African musical heritage in academic institutions of teaching, research, and performance, Cuba does not have indigenous population. In this sense, it is an absolute exception when compared to South, Central, and Latin North America. In order to overcome these 4 levels of musical racism, we will need to develop means of intervening in our musical schools based on 4 principles of intercultural pedagogy: education and research. These 4 principles are derived from the meeting of knowledges. A, racial and ethnic equality among students, lecturers, researchers, and musicians. This means that in the classroom here will be white and indigenous students and lecturers. Indigenous students will be included not just according to their demographic proportion of the country's total population, but to their epistemic, musical, linguistic proportions. B, to develop intercultural parameters for musical pedagogy. Indigenous students may be taught differently from the way white Eurocentric students and Black students are taught. Musical sensibility will demand a corresponding musical pedagogy. The aim of the music school must not be to convert an indigenous student of music into a generalized Western white student of music. With no offense to any white Eurocentric student, we are reflecting on anti-racist pedagogies. C, to develop intercultural formative parameters for an expectation of what should be the musical profile of a student who finished the music school. Since white, Black, and indigenous students enter school already with different backgrounds, training, and sensibility, and they are exposed to interculturally oriented pedagogy during their academic years, it is not necessary that they all conclude their course with the exact profile of musical knowledge. On the contrary, they can graduate with different musical profiles. And D, racial and ethnic equality among lecturers, white, Black, and indigenous music teachers. And also, indigenous masters will have to come to teach indigenous traditional music following their own oral systems of transmission. We take the main example of indigenous songs and flute playing. Indigenous techniques of sound production are completely different from Western styles of vocality, to the point of being incommensurable. Also, parameters for building melodies and performing them are radically different from Western parameters. The same extreme difference goes for flute making and flute playing. That is why only indigenous master musicians can teach indigenous singing and flute playing. This is not connected with ethnic identity, basically, but with difference in musical epistemologies. To summarize, the meeting of knowledges advances a general and integrative set of steps toward anti-racist pedagogy and a decolonized and multi-musical school of music in teaching, research, and practice. An interethnic and interracial classroom, both for the students and for the lecturers. To teach students according to their different epistemic background, white pedagogies, indigenous pedagogies, etc. To allow specific pathways within the course so that indigenous students will continue being indigenous musicians if they wish to be so, and not forced to be converted into Western type or musician. Indigenous music will be taught on a par with Western music. The curriculum will become plurimusical, and indigenous music masters should be invited to teach their own musical traditions as temporary and invited lecturers.
All right. Next, I would like to invite Jessie Vallejo, Associate Professor in Ethnomusicology and Mariachi Ensembles Director at California State Polytechnic University in Pomona, to present.
Okay. Thank you all so much for the invitation to join everybody speaking, and for all of you who made it here today. So I am an ethnomusicologist by training. I'm a mariachi musician who performs weekly. And I'm somebody who's of mixed race and ancestry, but I most identify with my lived experience as Mexican, Italian, American. I grew up on traditional Onondaga unceded lands near Syracuse, New York, one of two Mexican-American families there. And I received my bachelor's in music education from Crane, the Crane School of Music. And this is where I first met and heard Kondiwanhawi, or the Akwesasne Mohawk Women Singers Ensemble. And this was a formative moment for me because I was beginning my own language learning work of trying to learn Spanish, one of my heritage languages, and find ways to learn about my heritage through the music curriculum, which never addressed Latin American or Mexican musical styles. So I started becoming interested in these perspectives of learning mariachi music and learning Spanish and learning about my heritage as a violinist. And looking into culturally relevant and resonant materials and repertoire and pedagogies. Since then, my ethnomusicological research has primarily focused on sociocultural and linguistic safeguarding and revitalization. I've carried out some of my research with the Cook-Peters family from Akwesasne and their Kanien'keha teachers who have worked in 3 programs. So 2 in Akwesasne that I looked at and observed their programs, and 1 in 6 Nations. And I've also worked with Quechua Otavalan flutists and the Hatun Kodama Cultural Center in the Andes, just north of the equator. And so currently I live on unceded Tongva lands in the area of Pomona, California, so about 30 miles east of downtown Los Angeles. I'm the first Mexican-American and the first woman of color to be tenure track and tenured in my department at Cal Poly Pomona. This presentational space is a little complicated and in all sorts of great ways and complicated ways, I guess. But I just want to mention that I'm still learning and thinking through my teaching approaches. It's my 7th year at CPP, and a lot of my efforts in the last several years have been dedicated to surviving the tenure process, dealing with certain types of discrimination and confronting a lot of these systemic issues that some of which we're pointing out today. There are many teachers and experts I wish could be presenting with us today who I've learned from. And even though I'm a non-Indigenous settler researcher, I'm part of a community that is racialized and has been historically excluded from higher education, especially where I've grown up and worked. And this community also harbors experiences and knowledge systems that are discriminated against in colonial pedagogies and could be looked at as ways to help us move away from colonial and Eurocentric teachings, especially in music programs. So some questions that go through my head when I'm planning and trying to figure out how to teach, how I want to teach a certain course. First of all, when I'm decolonizing or working on how to do this with my teaching, I have to consider the fact that I'm geographically far from Quechua and Kanien'keha communities where I have professional relationships, friendships, and connections. So a lot of my connections also are busy. They have busy schedules, they have their own careers. And when I am able to invite them to collaborate, often through Zoom lately, I have to be mindful of the time burden placed on them to do something different than is what their daily life entails. I also don't have the same connections with Indigenous nations and Native American nations here in Southern California. That's something I would like to work on, but now that I have tenure and I have some more flexibility with some things. But my job description and the classes I'm assigned narrow some of the possibilities I'm able to look at or look into on a daily basis. So often I'm charged with teaching classes that don't deal with cultural approaches, or music from around the world, like careers in music, or some of the senior projects, those are independent studies. And so I have to guide students in their own choices. But the mariachi ensembles I teach I do want to point out that they are a music from here in the Los Angeles area, at least, where even if it's not indigenous to this area, it's been a part of this region for more than a century. So a lot longer than a lot of people realize. So my teaching often does involve music of here, even if there are many layers of here that we have to address. My funding is extremely limited. I don't get to work at a center or get support for having guest speakers. And really the mariachi ensembles, because of the ticket sales, I have some funding I can work with, but sometimes the parameters of who I'm able to invite and when are limited. And finally, I also want to avoid appropriating what I've learned from teachers in Quechua and Kanien'keha communities. It's not appropriate for me to go out and teach Escanye music performance when I'm not Kanien'keha, and I'm not in a context where that would be appropriate, even if the music is often shared publicly. So I've had to think of sort of broader lessons I've learned from teachers I've observed, who I've interviewed with, who I've talked about their approaches with, and also from all of the readings and Indigenous voices I've been able to learn from in publications or through workshops and discussions like this. So to get us sort of started thinking about, if you're in a similar situation like me, where the starting point seems a little difficult because you might have one or more of the limitations that I'm experiencing, I wanted to give us ideas of where to start. So first and foremost, read, cite, and teach materials and learn from people who are BIPOC scholars, knowledge holders, and culture bearers. So you can't do this without including people's voices and BIPOC voices. So invite guests from the community when possible, and be humble and ready to learn from the guests who you invite or who you might be able to observe at other programs via Zoom or nearby. Also, other approaches I've learned, especially through Hatun Kutama and Akwesasne Freedom School, are to abandon authoritarian linear models of teaching in your classroom. These, it might begin with how you set up the space in your classroom. How do you move around the classroom as an instructor or teacher or lecturer? How are students moving around your classroom? Is there movement at all? And is your classroom limited to 4 walls? You, or all of us, can create opportunities for multiple directions of learning and intergenerational learning. And so even in my context of the mariachi ensembles, I try to create opportunities of students who are ready to graduate versus new students being able to work with each other. So generations within an ensemble, or even generations of age of students or generations of community members. So peer-to-peer learning is incredibly important. Learning from the students and being humble in that way, student to teacher learning also. And I'm drawing a little bit from Freire and Freirean pedagogies here too. Then create opportunities for leadership and peer mentorship. And this was something I saw that was just incredibly effective and I thought was wonderful in Hatun Kutama and Akwesasne Freedom School, where teachers found ways to guide students' energies and celebrate their strengths while developing their skills. A student who might be labeled as a problem child in a colonial educational context could be, developed into a very strong leader and guided into positive learning experiences with these other approaches. Definitely, we need to abandon policies that are aimed at manipulating behavior and grading behavior arbitrarily. Oftentimes, people use grades as a way to police students into being silent and obedient, and that needs to go in many ways. So we need to think of the student as a whole person, and sometimes noisy classrooms are when learning is actually happening. Also, breaking out of the barriers and silos of specific courses, grades or learning levels, disciplines, This can be used in partnership of creating peer-to-peer learning and cultivating leadership and mentorship opportunities. I know at Akwesasne Freedom School, grades were blended and sometimes would break out to different activities, and it was based on skill and where students were in their own learning process, and also created opportunities for older students to mentor younger students. So there was a lot of working across the classrooms, and the walls didn't divide who was doing the work together. And I do this in my performances. I overlap my rehearsals and the repertoire that we rehearse, again, to mix in the different levels of learning. And finally, I want to just highlight the importance of cultivating a sense of community. And this can also include connecting with families and the surrounding community. In my case in Pomona, there are a lot of Spanish speakers who don't feel welcome on our campus. The buses to get to campus were actually removed by a past president. And finding ways to talk with them in Spanish in their language and invite them to events has been important. Talking with my students' parents who only speak Spanish makes a huge difference for them coming to our concerts and coming to our events, and makes the students feel more included too. And so trying to find ways to make our classrooms, multi-directional learning, intergenerational learning, and multilingual are really important. So those are the general ideas I wanted to highlight. And that's the end of my part of the presentation.
Thank you, Jessie and George and Tiriki and Sally and Graham and Clifford. And to those of us, to those others who are joining us for tonight, we envision tonight's session very much as a workshop. When we were meeting together, those of us who are working, Soy Bang and Megan Forsyth and many other scholars in designing what these anti-racist pedagogy sessions would be, there was a strong interest in having a real conversation about what people are trying, what they're doing, what they're finding along the way. So although last night, if you were with us for the session that Soy Bang was leading, there was, very formalized presentations and a discussion afterward. We know that many of you have also been doing work that's relevant to tonight's discussion in your own classrooms. And so we very much welcome a real open conversation. When we met, those of us who are facilitating or co-presenting tonight, when we met on Zoom, which was a challenge because we really are in so many different time zones, we found that it was difficult to contain a discussion to 2 hours and even have everyone speak once, because we had so much to share and there was such a vibrant discussion. So many ideas and experiences resonated for one another. So we kind of planned out that we would share these initial bits, which are mostly videos, and thanks Jessie for delivering that live. And then we planned out that we might go around the room and that everyone who might feel to could respond to what had been shared, and then open it up to more discussion. But don't feel that it's so formal. It is a way to organize all of us around here, though. So I'll serve as a kind of moderator just in terms of keeping a speakers list, of making sure that I'm not forgetting anyone. But really, we invite a conversation. Should we begin, Clifford? I know you had thought specifically about a few things that Tiriki had said.
Yeah, I like that quote where you said creative practice does not exist in a silo. I come from a nation of hunter-gatherers, and there's reasons why our treaties of peace and friendship and why we have unceded territory. And we are a peace-loving people, yes, but also we're very outgoing and diplomatic. If you look at our songs, there's adaptations of them sung all over the world. And a great example is our Mi'kmaq honor song, and it talks about honoring one another like the way we do in the old times. And there's music students across the world, and some of them in very elaborate setups are singing the Mi'kmaq honor song. So I like that comment that our creative practice does not exist in a silo, because the Mi'kmaq nation, where I'm from, we're very outgoing and diplomatic people, and a lot of the things that we do, the concept of two-eyed seeing, you know, you see me speak of it a little bit in the video where I'm talking about the strengths and the tenets of indigenous ways of knowing, combined with that of traditional, combine that with modern Western scientific ways of knowing. We celebrate both instead of going to school and just studying the Western things, Western knowledges. We also bring into the classroom, and it took a long time. I'm 58 years old, and when I was in my 30s, attending university, I was very surprised that my life as a Mi'kmaq person was be able to be brought into a science lab, to be brought into quite a variety of courses that I took. So within the Mi'kmaq world, sometimes it feels like our creative practice exists within a silo, but really, because of the outgoing diplomatic nature of our people, we're able to share the songs and the stories in very creative ways. And when me and my cousin Graham, who was also on this call, when we celebrated the sharing of just one incredible story of our community, a forced relocation that was just mired in racism, and we shared that story. Basically, it was a hidden gem. And after going through this process of decolonizing the institutions, fighting racism in very creative ways, there's more hidden gems. My community alone, and Graham, you can speak to this. Our cousin Donald Marshall Jr., fellow who spent 11 years in prison for a murder he did not commit. There's so many stories around that within our family that we could share. Those are hidden gems. You know, the history of the Mi'kmaq people, and the contribution to the world wars by our people who enlisted. There's so many hidden gems, and I think when you said creative practice does not exist within a silo, it should not exist, and that we should always have the opportunity to bring these stories, bring these hidden gems into the classrooms, get knowledge keepers into the classrooms and give them some time to speak, give them time to share the stories. And, you know, it livens up the institutions, it livens up the classroom settings, and it livens up the spark. We ignite the spark within our audiences and within ourselves, and it's like a fire, and we are responsible for that. We are responsible to be the fire keepers of that knowledge.
And I find here you're speaking too to the ways that Tiriki talked about across borders, right?
Yes.
Sharing across borders.
Yeah.
And the story you're talking about, Gundawikduk, is of course the topic of an article that you and Graham were involved in co-authoring in the Yearbook for Traditional Music, that I'm sure that many of the session's participants tonight have read. And that story, as you and Graham speak about in that article, was told through theatrical practice, through verbal art, speaking words and stories, through music, yeah. I'm wondering if Graham might like to open his mic now. Would you like to add anything further? Thank you, Clifford. I know he's driving, so I might just say, oh, there you go.
Hello, Marcia.
Hi, Graham, we can hear you.
Okay, my mic and my audio is good.
Yep.
Yeah, very good.
Okay. Lali Olam Sidwen, thank you all, for the amazing videos and the collaboration that we are here talking with on Mother Earth today. As my cousin was talking about the gems and about the importance of sharing our culture, but not only our culture, the cultures throughout the world of respecting one another and talks of reconciliation, of getting to know more of each other. And the project that we worked on with Gundawiktu is the prime example of that, of how communities have to come together to co-succeed for a better tomorrow. And when we have collaboration and when we have respect for one another, it does the world so much good on the different projects that we achieve. Of all the colleagues here on this call tonight, a bunch of amazing human beings that are trying to come together for a better world. And we do that through ethnomusicology, the study of music. But also, it's sort of speak of coming together of one drum. The universal musical instrument throughout the world is the drum. And in Mi'kmaq, we call it the heartbeat of Mother Earth. And when we come together in that same tone, in that same rhythm, and with the right tempo, with positivity, anything is possible. So we continue to beat our drums throughout the world to recognize and learn from one another. In today's world of social media, we have an amazing advantage of coming together virtually, that we can go and share each other's culture and learn about others' practices as well. Very honored tonight to join all of you in this amazing collaboration. So my language is Walalio, Imsid Nogama. Thank you to all of my relations. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. And I'll just say briefly before passing the mic along to one of our co-presenters that many of us teach within world music programs, and we kind of were thinking about that when we were developing anti-racist pedagogies. Not all of us, and that's important too. And so the original title was about teaching in indigenous musics. And it was Tiriki who talked about how, well, to whom are we teaching? Who is teaching? In what context? And so this idea of the music of here and the relationship to place really was something that spoke to all of us. And I'll note that from my own part, I have been really very intensely involved in research with Mi'kmaq and other communities here in recent years. And those relationships that I've developed outside the university are what I have worked really hard to bring back to campus on the university with students who are in the classroom, Mi'kmaq students, and settler students, settlers like myself. We are, I think the idea of relationship to place is important, also relationship of one another. So relationships of, the where to here, but also with whom. And as Tiriki noted too briefly in passing, is when. So in my pedagogy too, in the choices I make in the classroom, it's very much about the very specific group of people that have come together in each class every time that I'm teaching a course, for example, on Indigenous musics. At this point, though, I'd like to pass the mic over to someone else.
If I may jump in there, if it's all right, Marcia. wanted to say what an extraordinary space this is to be in. I think too often we feel as if we're doing this work in a bit of a vacuum sometimes, or we're trying to blaze a trail on our own. It does extraordinary things for as we say, our murup, our soul, our spirit, to seeing other people, certainly for me, other First Peoples who are in this space and navigating these conversations, particularly in place and around different lands or countries. And I should probably point out as well that my acknowledgement of a country in the video we recorded is now technically incorrect. It was right for the recording time, but for me now I have the honor of being able to say De Marunokananga, Galian Yakurumja, Yoriora. I'm here on the lands of my ancestors on Yoriora country, and it's given me a certain amount of pause. I particularly enjoyed the points that you both made, Graham and Clifford. Graham, when you spoke about this idea of I'll show you first, of learning through demonstration, through doing that proof, a lived experience of what we do, that we don't just theorize culture and story and song and whatever it might be. One of my aunties in community, when she taught me many years ago to weave an eel trap, would lay down all the materials and she'd sit down, she'd put them right there between the two of you, and she'd pick them up and she'd start weaving and she'd tell you stories. And after 2 or 3 stories, she'd look at you and say, well, do you know how to weave yet? And oh, God, I was supposed to be doing that. He said, well, just tell me one more story and I'll get it. And I think that really spoke a great deal as well, Clifford, to the points that you were making. I love this idea of multi-directional arrows of instruction. The opportunity, I think so often in our systems, we get closed off to the idea of learning ourselves when we're standing there at the top of a classroom or being asked. And again, Jessie, the idea of authoritarian and linear models of education, I think speaks to that as well. It's very industrial revolution, right? Someone standing at the front of a room and then everyone else standing in front of them and being instructed. When we break that down, and for me, when I say to my students, what are you going to teach me in all of this, has been quite extraordinary. I learn something new of my story each time I teach it. And I think that's very true of our peoples and of all First Peoples, because largely I think the system of colonization, of invasion, to give it the name that I prefer, the systems of invasion that we've dealt with that perpetuate in many of our teaching models now, they do not see the authority of the voice of First Peoples. And whilst there is a wonderful opportunity for collaboration, and I dearly love it, that big question that keeps coming back to me is, where is the authority of voice in this conversation? Who holds that authority? And how can I speak to and respect that? I mean, it's rare now. I'm in a hotel room right now. It's rare that I get to sit on my own country to speak. I'm normally a guest on someone else's. To think of what my role is there is vitally important to me. Having the work that we do approved and signed off by our elders and our knowledge holders and those who speak for that place is so much at the core. And I love seeing the parallels that we have, because I do agree with you, Graham, that collaboration and respect do lead to a better world. And I don't think the narratives of exclusion have come from our communities. I've traveled the world, I've met First Nations peoples, I've been honored to walk on many, many countries and many, many lands. And always my experience has been that of being welcomed and people wanting to share stories with me. And quite often my experience of non-Indigenous peoples in those places has been the same. People say, well, we don't know how to ask. We don't know how to ask. And we don't want to ask for fear of offending. However, I would contend, certainly here on this my country, that we have always had systems of welcoming in the outsider. We've always had methods of expressing our diplomacies and our requirements for how someone engages with the knowledge and stories of our country. And there is an expectation that people will want to learn these stories and see them again and will engage through our systems. It's just that largely those haven't been observed for fear of empowering our communities and the inalienable, can't speak this morning, the inalienable right that we have over these countries and these lands. I had a question in my head and it's kind of turned into more of a statement, so do forgive me for proselytizing there somewhat, but it is lovely to see these parallels, and I really look forward to the opportunity to tease these out some more, to look at those beautiful commonalities that we have, because from all of the collaborators that I see here on the screen, and I'm sure for all of us joining and the communities that we've engaged with, there are these examples of great heroes, great women and great men who have sought to have their stories told and who are the reason that we are here now. The reason we're here now is because there are people who have fought to have stories maintained, who have fought to maintain our songs in the face of tremendous adversity that we could never fully comprehend, what everything that they have struggled through. Those stories of strength and the stories of those great heroes are stories that I'm very, very keen to hear more of. So I apologize for turning my question into a statement. I kind of answered parts of it for myself as I was thinking out loud there, but it is a real joy. And I really do look forward to the conversations we can have and how we can celebrate more of the heroes and the stories and the histories that we share together in this space. There's so much there to unpack.
Thank you, Tiriki. Did I pronounce that right? Tiriki?
Perfectly, my brother. Thank you.
No, I just want to share a story since Graham brought it up, and it just, when we talk like this, we speak from the heart. We tell our stories and share our knowledge. It comes from love, and Graham spoke of the universality of the drum, how it's the heartbeat of Mother Earth, and how it's common for all cultures around the globe. So I was at an international event in my community. It was tall ships were visiting Sydney Harbor, Sydney, Nova Scotia, where we're from, and people from all over the world. The people on the ships too, the crewmates and all. They were mingling with the crowd because it's a festive atmosphere, and the Mi'kmaq had things going there as well, my people, and we had elders set up a teepee telling stories. We had a drum group there. They were singing the songs. I was there with my crafts, and I'm also telling stories too. I get invited in to tell stories, and a young man came off the ship. I think he was an American, and he goes, "There's something," and he's non-Aboriginal. He said, "There's something about this drum. I'm just attracted to the sound of the drum." And I told him, "You don't know what it is, right?" "No, it's something within my heart," he says. Very honest approach, just refreshing too. So I just told him, that's the heartbeat of Mother Earth. We all have this in common. The drum takes us back to a time where we received the most love, when we were in the womb of our mothers. We heard the first drum beat. And the poor guy, tears were just coming down his eyes, streaming. I don't know his history, where he came from or what was going on. And I asked him, "Are you all right?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm all right, but I really need somebody to talk to." So there was an elder who works with the youth and works really good fella. He's my mentor and friend, Lawrence Wells Senior, Lulan. I said, "Come, go to the teepee. I'll take you to see this elder, and you can talk it out." And I think he knew why that drum was so important to him, even though it's our culture, spreading the music, sharing the music. But that's what happens when we bring our songs and stories beyond the silos and into the hearts of not only our people, but those there to witness and be part of. It's not just we're doing a performance here, We're sharing our songs, we're sharing our stories, we're sharing our lives, and we're sharing our teachings. And I felt good for that young man. I felt good. Even though my explanation brought tears to his eyes, I think he needed us that day. And the drum brought us all together.
Thank you, Clifford.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Uh, thank you for those kind words, Tiriko. Is that what it is?
Tiriki, but close enough. As long as there's a T and a K sound in there, I answer to anything.
Tiriki, Walalan, Galuk Daladigan. Thank you so much, Tiriki, for the kind words. Amazing. And for the, the drum. I apologize as my driver as I am heading back, but of what I did a public speaking event. Majority was non-Indigenous people throughout, and I sang them the honor song, and they were kind of intimidated per se to join in, as that's kind of like our national anthem. And I had to be clear with them that when you translate it into English, it means my people, let us all gather, let us all help one another, as the Creator has put us here on Mother Earth. And when I explained to them, I said I didn't say all and only Indigenous people. I didn't say only white people or black people or yellow people. I said all human beings, let us all come together and help one another. And when we translate the Mi'kmaq honor song, that is what we meant. Here in the province of Nova Scotia, we are always proud of our unceded peace and friendship treaties that have forever long and lasting as long as the rivers flow, as they say. But in Nova Scotia, we are saying that we are all treaty people. As non-Indigenous allies are becoming more and more important. And I am forever grateful of all non-Indigenous allies throughout the planet, is that now is the time to come together. Because as minorities, sometimes we are stuck in that oppressive state of mind that we have to have non-Indigenous allies supporting us, caring for us, respecting us, wanting to know the stories. Then we are forever more grateful of that. And it brings our mind to an ease and our heart so warm that we can stand in confidence and to tell our stories. When we have relations like that, that is the key. The key is to have relations, and we are always open for relations throughout the world. And one other thing, and that's really I want to emphasize is keeping those relations, getting to know one another, because the possibilities are endless. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham.
Yeah, oh, sorry. Yeah, Graham, I agree with you 100%. We speak of partnerships. Partnerships will get us to the table. And with people like us, the Mi'kmaq Nation, and those willing to work with us beyond partnerships into collaboration and into allyship, that's where the magic happens. Once you collaborate and treat each other as allies, work with the strengths and weaknesses of each, build upon our mutual respect and come up with classic deliverables. And I think It's nice when the universities say, oh, we are a partner with the local Indigenous community, and the partnership is only at the table. It's when there are projects that show collaboration and true collaboration and allyship, kinship. Those are the things our ancestors always brought, not only to the table, but in the natural world. So I'm very excited with what's going on in this workshop, because we speak of not only partnership, we go deeper in through collaboration and allyship, and we're going to develop some incredible and creative deliverables, I'd say.
Yeah, we are planning to write an article collaboratively that will be published in the forthcoming music culture special issue on anti-racist pedagogies. We're all looking forward to developing that. And certainly the work, internationally, as you were all speaking to, is the reason that we were committed, even though there are challenges, logistical challenges, we are committed to connecting with people around the globe in this workshop. And the comments you made also begin to point back to the institutional context. And so with that, I think I might, if it's okay with everyone, if I might like to read the question that Sui Beng posed. She says, thank you for sharing your stories with us. What are some of the challenges that you faced bringing tradition bearers and ways of teaching into the classroom, and how do you deal with institutional policies regarding collaborative research and authorship that continue to be colonial? And here I wonder if we might invite some speakers we haven't heard from yet, perhaps Sally or Jessie. I don't know if we can see Jorge, great, as well as Clifford, Tiriki, and Graham, but might one of you like to open up your mic, Sally?
Sure. Thanks so much, Marcia and Clifford and Graham. I'm sitting here on Wurundjeri lands, just in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. I pay my respects to Wurundjeri peoples and ancestors and children, past, present, and yet to come. And Tiriki, I honour your place and people there on Yorta Yorta, and I'm so pleased that you're able to be there right now. Also honouring the work of your forebears there. So yeah, I work alongside Tiriki at the Willan Centre at the University of Melbourne, and kind of on the edge of the Willan Centre, I guess, over the last few years, having been fairly focused on research activity, but now find myself in a privileged position of directly working with in the teaching and learning space, and particularly the question of, well, what do Indigenous music subjects look like in the modern Conservatorium of Music and College of the Arts in our faculty. And I guess in doing that, we've learned a lot from past experience of Willan, of bringing Indigenous experts, artists, and lecturers into the space. And also we've learned a lot from our experience as researchers. So to this question of some of the challenges, I think for me, I think back to a statement that Noongar ethnomusicologist Clint Bracknell made at a similar forum to this in the Australian context about a year ago in Reconciliation Week in 2020. And he really foregrounded that there's a continual clash between Indigenous self-determination and institutional ideologies, particularly around this question of authority of voice, of right to represent what Indigenous music is. And, in the Australian context, particularly the right to say Indigenous music is whatever music Indigenous people practice. And it's very much up to the individual to determine that. So in terms of challenges in the classroom, there's still in Australia today, particularly in Indigenous music classes and subjects, there's still a privileging of what, if you like, in a Eurocentric sense, has been determined to be authentic or, or real indigenous music, so people pointing to classical traditions of this land. And this is very much based on histories of ethnomusicological research that privilege certain forms of music. But indeed, in line with practices of self-determination, Indigenous music is constantly shifting and changing, innovating. The kinds of gems that Clifford mentioned before, real lived experience in the here and now, real lived experience of how to navigate changing world and challenges in the world. This is where contemporary Indigenous musical knowledge is located. So a big challenge for us has been actually to shake up the standard, if you like, canon of works that are addressed in music courses and bring in contemporary perspectives. Our forebears in Australian reggae and rock histories, our youth who may not be considered masters or experts at the height of their tradition, but are actually experts in particular forms of learning and at their stage of life, which is as complete in their world as that of a master's. And of course, our Indigenous classical musicians, people like Brenda Gifford, and the number of classical composers coming through. So breaking open the canon has been a big issue, and ensuring that we're inclusive of multiple diverse voices when we look at what guest artists we're bringing in. Other kinds of challenges, of course, can be quite tangible. Things like, when we're entering into arrangements with communities, we're dealing with histories of practice with this great, as Tiriki mentioned, there's this great long standing expertise in engagement, expertise in diplomacy and diplomacy through practice. Yet the university is a really blunt and somewhat limited beast in that regard. So there can be a real lack of transparency around the implicit contracts that may be being imposed on Indigenous knowledges. So what we try to do is really bring to the fore conversations about the limitations of the university, arrangements around IP, really kind of pushing back to the system to make sure that the rights of Indigenous artists are protected when bringing their knowledges into the academy. Ensuring that moral rights are also foregrounded, and just being as transparent about limitations as possible, because the university has and institutions in general have a long way to go in that regard. And I guess there's many points that could be brought up, but another very important thing is just the question of, enabling Indigenous artists coming in to participate on their own terms. A lot of the work that we do as representatives, as players within our institution is, I guess, kind of emotional care for students and for staff, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And we're bringing Indigenous artists in. We're really honouring their knowledges and contents and practices and prioritising their expertise in process, and in a way that knowledge needs to be delivered through through students acquiring implicit knowledges and skills and, kind of knowledge through participation. But at the same time, we can't expect those artists to be taking on the labor of care for students unless that is kind of within the scope of what they've requested and want to do. So yeah, there's complexities there. We wish to honor and respect, but there's a lot of care to be taken in the process. That's what I'd add to the conversation at this point.
Thank you, Sally. George, Jessie?
I have some comments, but I don't know, George, did you want to go too, or?
Yes, if I could make some comments. First of all, I would like to say hello and a big hug to good friends that I can see here. Beverly Diamond, Soy Bentan, Judith Cohen. We met each other 15 years ago in Spain. That's the last time I ever heard of you. Rosângela,
José Carvalho, sim,
yeah,
sim.
yeah, sure. We were together in the
Foi
museum.
há
in
coisa
Spain,
de muito
remember?
tempo, não, não foi? Foi em CIBE, não? La CIBE.
Exactly.
Acho que
We were,
sim. I was listening to you and thinking, whoa, whoa, that was a long time.
yeah, we were singing and clapping with the pandeiros and rattles in the museum. Yes.
You know, as we speak, it's very interesting. I'm preparing a paper for a conference this weekend. And as I've been listening to you, I've actually been changing things that I've been saying. And it's all about Sephardic culture. And most of the people who come to the conference will be Sephardic, but I'm not, for one thing. So, you know, all these questions of who gets to talk about whom and how. But the interesting thing is that many of them, the ones who are organizing it, actually have lived for almost 200 years in the Brazilian Amazon.
Wow.
And they're Moroccan
Never
Sephardic.
heard of this. Never heard of that.
Yeah, it's, I mean, I knew they existed, but I didn't know much about them till this pandemic year, actually.
Wow.
And as I said, they've been there a long time, and some of them, you know, speak indigenous languages, some of them married with indigenous people, others didn't. And it brings up all kinds of questions I really never even thought about. And they originally went out for the rubber trade in the early 19th century, around 1810, 1820.
Rubber. Yes.
And some went to escape the Inquisition earlier on. So, you know, brings up a lot of other questions, but I've learned so much, you know, just now from listening to you all. And I've been, as I said, actually adjusting what I'm saying. Oh, wait, let me think about that again.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. Maybe I can make some extra comments on musical racism, as you say, and it has to do with representation. If I can, yes, if I can elaborate a little bit from what Soyden asked.
Yes.
I must say that there are also some colleagues here from the Meeting of Knowledges in Brazil. Edilberto Fonseca is here, Leticia Viana, who works with me in Brasilia. Edilberto is in Rio, and Rosângela is in Minas Gerais. There's also Meeting of Knowledges. There is also Eurides now from Paraíba. If I could comment on what you say, I was impressed by the words that Graham used to say, by the positive signifiers that he used all the time. He says of reconciliation, he says of come together, he says collaboration, respect for one another, sharing. It's all about differences that can work effectively with affection positively. For me, the idea then of Soyben, I think is so wonderful how we are managing maybe to break some of these, as you say, those colonial structures by just saying that we start with the discipline, with masters coming to teach one course. Now, then after that, they also are co-researchers. They are also in our group of research as part of our research groups. And then one step further, some of them come even for examining people. We now have master's degrees and PhDs that masters come to the committee, to the doctorate, to the exam committee. So these are breaking, you know, as you say, the colonial structure of the university, and the university has to accommodate. How can you bring someone who is illiterate to be on a committee of a PhD? Well, let's find a solution for it. But they have to be there because they are the ones who really know. So it's a really process. But if I could just elaborate one thing on anti-racist, if we say anti-racist pedagogies, we part from the principle that there is racism. Racism is a very heavy word. But I would say that racism is a psychosocial structure. It's a heavy word, but it's a psychosocial structure. So if we can just analyze in 3 minutes what I think about the racism in music. If we analyze the characteristics of racism in music, maybe we can devise pedagogies to dissolve it, hopefully in the future to overcome it even, at least to diminish it, to dissolve it. How is that? Because I believe that music sounds like Western music, why people heard it as if they were superior to other music, as to indigenous music? Because of primary positive affective identification. Once you learn certain melodies when you are young, sung or played music from someone who established a relationship, an affective, positive relationship with you, that styles of music becomes part of your positive affective structure. So your affection for family, for your friends, for your spouse or married couple or whatever, comes sometimes from music because you learned the positiveness of certain styles of music. What happened with indigenous music, but people have never learned, never heard it properly. So they didn't have the opportunity to build this primary positive affective identification through indigenous music. Racism in the visual arts are much more direct, right? You depict indigenous as horrible as compared to whites. In films, you can see in Griffiths, the racism of blacks and whites and so on. So in the visual arts, there is a way that you have to combat racism because racism is direct. Even in theater, in literature, is also sometimes very blunt, very direct. In the case of music, I think it's more indirect. You cannot erase the positive affection that people have towards European music, towards Western classical music. What you have to do is to bring other new positive identifications with indigenous musics. And the only way it can be done is through the indigenous master musicians. They will connect, make the students to connect with the songs, with the sounds that they never heard or heard sometimes, as Judith say, represented. Because we have people in Brazil that, they wear like indigenous people, they put necklaces and so on, and dance and sing indigenous songs with Western vocality and so on. So that's what Baudrillard would call a simulacrum of indigenous music. The meeting of knowledge's basic point is that indigenous masters, indigenous musicians will come to teach their music, their singing, their playing. So positive effects will come on a par then with Western music. This is what I say is through education. That's the only way I can imagine this can be done. This is what I would like to more or less say, and how all the grammar that Tiriki, but that Clifford and Graham said of the arrow, the double arrow. That's it. I mean, if you learn wonderful Western songs, now you would learn wonderful Western indigenous songs. We can share this. This is the idea. I think this is anti-racist pedagogy. But in order to exist, masters have to be with us, equal to us, as professors as we are. This is, as I understand, is our anti-racist struggle in pedagogy, in schools of music. That's it. Thanks.
And then I wanted to jump in and add to the first part of Soybang's question, and just some of the practicalities of trying to adapt different pedagogies within an ensemble rehearsal for the mariachi. There have been a lot of, I guess they might count as microaggressions or like pushbacks from other faculty. So in the way that the evaluation and tenure system is set up in the Cal State system, for example, we have to be evaluated by other faculty members, many who never studied any type of pedagogy other than, what they learned as a student, but not as like, they didn't go through teacher training, right? And so I get evaluated by like a jazz professor, a white jazz professor, or, a band professor or choral conductor. And this way of structuring my rehearsals to be peer-to-peer learning is I get critiqued for that. And I could imagine many of us who might be trying to adapt knowledge and pedagogies from our own practices, from being a mariachi or from people who are trying to come in and teach from their Indigenous backgrounds, like it's difficult because once you're on that tenure track, people are coming in and trying to force you into that mold through the critiques. And so the peer-to-peer learning that's been brought to my attention is it's not, efficient use of time, it's too loud, all sorts of things. And I have to constantly push back at that when I respond to those evaluations and say, no, this is intentional and this is why. In part, it's intentional because you get hired to be in a position like this and people expect you to revolutionize the way things work as long as it doesn't inconvenience somebody, but then you don't get the time that it takes to do that. So there aren't private lesson teachers for people to teach, the instruments that are unique to mariachi, for example. So I have to teach that on top of teaching a group ensemble. And I need to rely on also the peer-to-peer learning because my advanced guitarrón player, the bass instrument, the instrumentalist needs to help me teach the beginners so that I can work with some of the other instrument sections. So there's a lot of barriers for the time that we are given to work on these different pedagogies. And then the critiques for how we teach, or if I'm teaching orally and I'm not teaching sight reading music, critiques can come back from the musicianship professors and things like that. So it's been a challenge to do that. I have the privilege of having studied in a few different contexts so that I can anticipate some of those and I can respond to them and strongly sometimes where I think it would be a little bit more tenuous or uncomfortable for people. But I just wanted to point that out, that it's a challenge with those critiques that try to force you to stay within a box.
That's a fantastic. Oh, sorry, Marcia, did you want to go? Okay. Yeah, a brilliant point, Jessie, and if I can add on to that, I think this is one of the biggest challenges. I think, and Sally, correct me if I'm wrong, but I will take the liberty of speaking for both of us to a certain extent to say that one of the biggest pieces of work I think we have to engage in for us within our university is educating our colleagues before we get the chance to educate our students. It's working reasonably well for us now within our faculty, the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music, where Sally and I are, but that's probably from putting in the best part of a decade or so's of effort working with those colleagues. When we move outside of our faculty into the broader university, the whole thing changes. Again, if you put the words First Nations, Indigenous or Aboriginal on a subject, instantly it is scrutinised to a much, much higher level. I think we still often operate under the weight of low expectations that somehow teaching Indigenous Aboriginal knowledges are easier, in inverted commas, something like they're not, like it's not as sophisticated, or it doesn't fit into the system quite so well. We recently put a subject through for all of our first year students. Every student coming to Victorian College of the Arts will have to do a compulsory first year subject, which is offered through the Willen Centre to ground them in Indigenous knowledges in place. It's a very cursory introduction, but it's a step forward. I think by the time we were finished, because it had to go to the broader university for approval, we had 8 shepherds looking over this, instructing it in different ways, each one contradictory, each one moving in another direction, each one. So, well, it doesn't quite fit in. Is it hitting those learning outcomes? It's extraordinary to have more than one shepherd, but every time I've been involved in a development like this, I see again and again people coming to pull it apart. And I think it's hard being a First Nations person or a minority person within the system. The expectation to assimilate, I think, is still often is ever present, and it's one that we often battle against. I've chosen myself, I think, to try to turn it around the other way. I just want to assimilate them instead, and it seems to be working reasonably well in certain ways, but it is a challenge and it is an issue, I think, and that a big part of this conversation, before we can even get to our students, is the education of those around us and dispelling the myths and the legacies that have been passed on to them. And I feel quite sorry for them in that space, for me, because for 99% of my non-Indigenous colleagues and friends and loved ones, they have struggled under a misnomer that says that the stories of place, that these knowledges are not for them. And it's very, very sad, because I think about what they've missed out on. I really do. And I feel particularly sorry for those sad racists who still keep closing themselves off on it, because they'll never know what they're missing out on. And it is particularly sad. We can hope to heal them somewhat one day, but this is, I think, was why I talk about the strength of identifying the heroes in our communities, and black or white, brindle, wherever they come from, those who have stepped across to make that change, because there is something there for each of us to be proud of. And once we start pulling it apart, I think more of us identify with those histories. But it is a big challenge to try to disassemble aspects of the system whilst still working within it as well, because there's some great benefits there too. I'm not sure I've worked out entirely the right way, but we're giving it a good go anyway.
Thank you, Tiriki. And just to kind of recall and share with the group here that one of the things we spoke about earlier in meetings was speaking about Indigenous resilience, rather than this idea that something is lacking or something is lost, but a place of resilience and revitalization, that was really key. Also, you spoke about heroes, and I am looking at the ways in which that resonates with the comment that Beverly Diamond shared. José Jorge's initiative in Brazil has taught many of us some strategies. And those of us in the co-presenters remember me saying that I first heard him, 10 years ago in Mexico City, speaking about this meeting of knowledges methodology, and it's one of the reasons that we invited him to this space. So meeting, Beverly says, is crucial. We had the privilege of welcoming several Indigenous guests recently and paired each one with a non-Indigenous faculty member. So for example, an opera singer had to think about what a, quote, healthy, unquote, voice was like from a different perspective. I also think, says Beverly Diamond, that Indigenous administrators are doing heroic and difficult work. And Tiriki, you are one of those heroes. We have currently at the Memorial University of Newfoundland, where Beverly is, a university president who is an Indigenous woman, but she has to meet with those in the province's business communities, for example, oil industry execs, who help fund the university. What a difficult place to be. Might you have some response to that, Tiriki?
What a difficult place to be as well. It's interesting that we find for me to, if I might pass on a little bit of history of the Willen Centre. When I first came 13 years ago, I came to give one guest lecture and then never left. But we didn't offer academic programs back then, and I certainly wasn't an academic. I was just an artist that found my way in off the street, and I was reasonably good at holding up my end of a conversation. So they let me talk about what I did in front of people, which was a great honor. I'm still worried I'll get found out one of these days, but it was extraordinary. And to think to the example that you make, Beverly, of the president there, it's so incredibly hard. We were always independently, externally funded, our organisation, the Willen Centre, within the faculty. And when that funding ceased, there began a conversation about, do we really need Willen, and how are we going to work this out? And once it started to have to come out of people's budget lines, things became a lot more difficult. This was a long time before the current leadership that we have at our faculty, and even the leadership before that. And we're very well loved and supported now, I must say. But the question then became, well, if we wanted to get more, we want to get more more money, more funding to keep doing what we're doing to support First Nations students coming in and offer cultural consultation, if you will, around the faculty, where will we look? And a lot of the conversations that came back was, oh, so it's fine. Look, you know, there are these mining companies that want to support, or there is this casino that wants to give money. And it was difficult in those days to say, well, no, I'm sorry, we can't do that. We'll write academic programs instead. And it turned out wonderfully. But again, you know, frequently we come up on these questions of, well, you know, should we approach mining companies or others for philanthropic funding? Shall we do this? And to be in this position of having to explain the sense of cultural unsafety that our communities are put in again and again, and that our students who don't necessarily have a voice are put in by having to agree in these spaces, is tremendously difficult to navigate all of the aspects of those systems. There's so much that our Aboriginal communities carry in these spaces that is unseen. It's certainly not in a position description. It's certainly not referenced in performance reviews and things like that. But the navigating of these spaces is often one of the hardest. And it's certainly not something that's going to go away anytime soon either, I don't think. This is certainly the biggest part, I think, in many ways of the job for me. I'm incredibly fortunate to have such wonderful colleagues like Sally. Again, I should point out that I don't do this in a vacuum. I've got amazing colleagues and friends who do support in this space, but sometimes trying to go against the grain, if you will, is really challenging. I think the majority of our time, for me and Sally and other colleagues of ours, like Dr. Megan McPherson, who works with us as well, a lot of our time is spent trying to work out how far we can bend the rules before they break. It's that space of getting right up against the edge of it, and then justifying. But I do find it's always much easier to ask for forgiveness and permission these days, though. Much easier.
I think I'd just like to very briefly add is just to further speak to this point that there is a massive load on Indigenous staff and Indigenous students, almost kind of in parallel with an increasing institutional interest in having, you know, a decolonized curriculum and content and so on. But the load on staff is at the same time increasing, and unless that is matched with further support for staff and an ecosystem of staff and identified staff, support for early career Indigenous scholars coming through, support for senior academics to actually to achieve their career goals and research goals and so on. It's just so like my sense of it is that it is just so fragile and just so risky for the very real well-being concerns of individuals. So it's great that there's this increased attention and interest in institutions across Australia and the world to decolonize, to increase Indigenous perspectives and content. But still to this day, it feels like the emphasis is on content, and it risks kind of a tone of extractivism, unless that's actually traveling alongside real development of staff and resources alongside consultation and real true engagement. Like, we need to think about the sustainability of people and the well-being of people. Like this needs to be a real act of care. And we're edging, but there's a lot more listening to be done.
Thank you, Tiriki and Sally, and to everyone. It seems like we're all thinking similarly. Bev said in response to her first longer comment, maybe I was trying to say that health and ecologies are two areas where I think conversations are increasingly vital. And I think that also resonates, Sally, with, you know, this certainly you were talking about extractivist styles of living. José Jorge was talking about, you know, one third of the masters of meeting of knowledges come from an area of health. like medicinal plants, shamanism, etc., agroecology. I know Graham and Clifford have talked about traditional medicines from the land in the stories and the songs that they share and teach in the classrooms. These seem to be crucial areas, and music is a part of them. And Beverly goes on to say, some of you might find interesting a project that a classical music duo Concertante, created last year in collaboration with many, including a number of indigenous composers. It was called The Ecology of Being, and the website is still live, I believe. So I think many of us will look for, oh, thank you very much, Toshio, for putting that in the chat. Ecologies and ecosystems then are a thread through this whole discussion. And I hate to say it, but we're coming to the very end of our time. I know Toshio has something to read briefly. I want to thank, from my heart, all of our colleagues and co-presenters for sharing their thoughts. And I know that we will continue this discussion. And I look forward to that as we work together toward, for example, an article and perhaps something else in our future that we can share. As part of educating ourselves, I speak for myself and our colleagues more broadly, sharing the learning with others toward a better future for all. And I know that we were very careful. We made a choice together to invite our Mi'kmaq colleagues to speak first, as this is their home. And so I think we might also, before Toshio reads us out, we might also invite Graham and Clifford to have the last word in the session.
Sure, Graham, you want to go first?
Go ahead, Cliff.
All right. No, it's been an honor to speak and share our stories and our thoughts, the processes of where we are and how we do things. It's very important. You know, communication is a strong tool. The sharing of our songs, stories, our languages, all the beauty that's within not only our cultures but everybody's culture is it's sacred. And when I spoke about those multi-directional learning arrows, that is a sacred way of teaching, and that's the sacred way of learning. And I think when we talk about how we move forward and how we're going to bring out these hidden gems, I also spoke with Marcia. We were talking about some of the challenges we had, and I said, you know what? We just got to keep doing our work. Everything that's not celebrated with us, they see it. We just keep going. We forge our own path and we create champions. So that you get people like me and Graham who come from the community and we help, but we can get somebody from each university who can forge ahead and become champions. And I always said, you know, if we're challenged to bring indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing into a university, what is the strength of that university if it's not readily and favorably accepted?
Thank you. Graham?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I just want to, you know, congratulate you all. And I don't know if I have time, but I'd like to honor you guys all with a song, if you guys don't mind.
Oh, that's it, brother. You got her.
But I don't know if you guys can see me, but I am here traveling through Mi'kmaq, and all the wise words and all the beautiful people. And you know, as an indigenous person here in Mi'kmaq, we've always had to fight for our survival for hundreds of years. And through systemic racism and different types of racism, we still have to fight for our survival. We still have to fight on who we are and where we come from. And I'd like to honor you all of the amazing work that you guys do. Getting me there, Donde Leon no te Niga masto Ge ma vidane Getting me there, Dominate Damwala Bexote Niga masto Ge abona maro Que abona maro tienes tan que sok del ligalo se ula sit kamu hawe aheo we oh we oh we oh we oh Well,
Ciao.
I'm Sid Nogama. Thank you all.
Thank you, Graham.
We got to meet in person one of these days, this whole crew. We need a big conference.
I guess we have our.
Yeah, we got lots to share, you know, beyond the screens.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Graham.
And thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much. Maybe there are some conversations we can continue on email or otherwise. We look forward to continuing with one another, the co-presenters, and with everyone who's joined us today. And to say thanks again to Toshio for supporting our conversation today. And I know you have a bit of homework from the conference organizers, so I'll let you do your job now.
Okay, thanks, Marcia. So thank you all for joining us today. This is not the last Dialogues event. We have 2 more workshops happening on Tuesday and Wednesday at 6 p.m. Universal Time. They're both workshops covering the important work of decolonizing and decolonizing syllabi. So I hope you join us for that. And thank you to all the presenters for an amazing job. And thank you all participants for joining us. Hope to see you again.
Thank you and take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Valeo.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Gracias.
Bye-bye.
Merci beaucoup.
Gracias. Sí.
Thanks.
Bye.